Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we begin, we'd like to take a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you. If you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you may not be able to access the poll. For best results, you want to be sure that you're viewing this presentation from within the Zoom application. So we have arranged for this entire grants conference to take place this year online with 2 weeks worth of webinars for the research community with no more than 2 sessions per day. The content for this series is similar to what it would be for an in-person grants conference. All of the sessions have been pre-recorded. However, we will be taking live Q&A. For information about the sessions and all our speakers, please visit the conference website. If you have questions, we ask that you submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom. We're encouraging attendees to upvote questions. To upvote a question, you navigate to the Q&A function and click on the thumbs up button. And this will bring the most popular questions to the top of the Q&A window. At the end of the presentation, we'll spend some time answering your questions. Please do keep in mind, we do have a relatively large audience for this session, so it's possible we may not be able to answer all of your questions. In addition, we are recording this session, and it will be made available on our website at nsfpolicyoutreach.com in the coming weeks, and we'll be sure to send you an email as soon as those sessions have been posted. If you have technical difficulties during this presentation, please also use the Q&A and someone will be able to assist you. So thank you for participating in our poll. We're happy and excited that you can join us as this marks our first ever virtual grants conference. And as I've mentioned in other sessions, we've been doing these conferences at NSF since 1993. They began as small one-day events with a handful of program staff, and they've grown over the years to 2 full days, 25 to 30 staff, and now a virtual event. We hope that you'll enjoy the conference and all the sessions that you've chosen to attend. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover some NSF-wide programs, the Research Experiences for Undergraduates program, and Research Experiences for Teachers, and the Facilitating Research at Primarily Undergraduate Institutions, or the RUI program. This session will be covered by Amelia Greer from the Directorate for Engineering and Jennifer Wade from the Directorate for Geosciences.
Hi, I just want to welcome all of you to this session. In this session, I'll be joined by a colleague and we'll be talking about the Research Experiences for Undergraduates program, the Research Experiences for Teachers program, RET, and then REU and ROA. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. So, and a little bit about myself. So my name's Amelia Greer. I'm an Associate Program Director in the Division of Engineering Education and Centers in the Directorate for Engineering. I've been at NSF now for almost 7 years, but in a few different areas, in a few different roles. And right now, I currently run and manage our workforce development related programs in my office related to engineering. And I'm going to talk a little bit about REU and RET. And as I said, I'll then turn it over to my colleague, Jennifer Wade, who will talk about RUI. So the Research Experiences for Undergraduates program is the first one I'm going to give a little bit of information on, and then I'll touch on the Research Experiences for Teachers program, and then Jennifer will take over. So our Research Experiences for Undergraduates program, there are really 2 aspects to the program, sites and supplements. They are both described in the REU program solicitation, which is NSF 19582. And the next deadline for REU sites is next August the 25th in 2021. There's an annual deadline for the REU sites program, which you can find in the solicitation and on the program website, which is listed here. For supplements, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the supplements entail, there's no deadline for those. So those can be submitted at any time to an existing award, if you have an active existing award, or as part of a new or renewal research proposal. So on the program website, you'll find more information about the solicitation, about contacts. So this is an NSF-wide program. As I mentioned, that I manage this program in the engineering directorate for engineering-related sites, but I have colleagues across the foundation that manage the program for the various other research topic areas. So you can find the contact information for my colleagues there and links to recent awards, which can be really helpful if you are thinking about writing a site proposal to get a sense of what's been funded in the past or maybe what's new and exciting. So feel free to take a look at that. There's also the contact information for the PIs who have been funded for those sites. And I know that other PIs, when they're interested in writing a site proposal, have found it helpful to even reach out to those who have already been funded, who may have good advice or be able to answer questions as you put together your site proposal. So a little bit about the program goals. The REU program aims to provide appropriate and valuable training experiences for undergrads, specifically through their participation in authentic and novel science and engineering research. So REU students who are involved, they'll be involved in projects that hopefully expose them to research, either in ongoing research programs or projects, or maybe side or connected projects related to active research that are designed specifically for the undergraduates' participation. What we're looking for in these sites is projects that feature high quality interactions between students and faculty and their research mentors. Sometimes graduate students end up mentoring undergrads. I don't know if any of you have mentored undergrads either through a formal REU or an informal REU, but that experience that you've had, if you're interested in submitting a site, will be really helpful in understanding what it takes to mentor undergrads and support undergrads. What are the appropriate facilities and professional development opportunities that you should be providing to undergrads who are participating? So when we talk about these REU sites, they must have well-defined common focus. So we're looking for students who participate in the sites to have a feeling of a cohort. One of the wonderful things that comes out of these sites is the network that the students build with each other. And so that cohesive cohort feeling is an important thing for these sites to have. They can be based in a single discipline or a single department, or they can be very multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary and span a number of different departments. But making sure that there's a theme, regardless of whether it's in one department or multiple, will help those students feel that cohort feeling and sort of understand the context in which they're doing the research, their research. The proposals should reflect the unique combination of your organization's interests and capabilities and of the mentors and the PIs who are running it. So whether that's based at only your one institution or whether you're partnering with other institutions or other organizations. Sometimes I know in engineering, we often encourage involvement of industry partners, especially if the research that you're doing links well with industry, especially local industry. That can be a really wonderful experience for students to get a sense of the context of the research that they're doing and sort of where engineering research can take them professionally. In terms of the significance, it's an important means for extending this high quality research environments and bringing in students who would otherwise not have an opportunity like this. So we really, one of the major goals of the program is to involve students who are maybe at academic institutions where research programs are limited, or their likelihood of being involved in research is really limited. So that's one of the major goals of the REU program as well, is to really broaden who gets to participate in research and broaden the exposure to research. So REU program supplements, they typically are for just 1 or 2 undergraduate students to participate in research as part of a new or an ongoing NSF-funded research project. If you are involved in a center or a large research effort, you may want to talk to your cognizant program officer and see if it would be appropriate for you to submit a supplement for more than 1 or 2 students. For example, my office manages engineering research centers, which is a really large centers program. Sometimes those centers, it's more appropriate for them to submit a supplement request for more than a couple students. Make sure that if you are interested in submitting a program supplement, that you give serious attention not only to developing the students' research skills, but also to involving them in the culture of the research in your discipline, and connecting them with other experiences in your field that will really sort of expand their general course of study and again, broadening their exposure to authentic science and engineering research, and what does that mean in terms of career opportunities down the road, whether it's grad school or industry or whatever it is. So that we do have some special program opportunities that are kind of exciting with the REU program. One of them is a partnership with the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense, specifically the Air Force in recent years, will co-fund some of our projects, some of our REU sites that align well with their areas of interest. Additionally, if you are thinking of submitting an REU site proposal and you have a strong collaboration with international partners, or you think students would benefit from a collaboration with international partners, you can submit a request that has a strong international component. And we work closely with our international office to manage those sites. And also research experiences for teachers. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this research experiences for teachers component sort of as a standalone, but sometimes REU sites will have a component that involves maybe a K-12 teacher joining the undergrads in research or something like that. So for the REU program, in terms of eligibility, for site proposals, we ask that a single individual be designated as the PI, and then 1 additional person can be designated as the co-PI, and then any other research supervisors or mentors that are involved should be listed as non-co-PI senior personnel. So there really should be a PI, a co-PI, and then the rest should be, as I mentioned, non-co-PI senior personnel. So that's where the faculty mentors would be listed if you're preparing a site proposal. In terms of students, so the student participants, if you're preparing a site proposal, anyone who's a U.S. citizen, a U.S. national, or a permanent resident would be eligible in terms of your recruitment of students. Or if you're encouraging your own students to apply for REU sites, just bear in mind that that's one of the requirements in terms of eligibility. Typically students who have already received their bachelor's degrees and are no longer enrolled as an undergraduate are not eligible. There may be a few exceptions to this, but I would recommend that you talk to your cognizant program officer if you're wondering about this. But otherwise, undergrads who are eligible really are students who are actively undergraduates. One of the major requirements, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, is that because we're trying to have these sites really broaden exposure and really maximize the number of students who get to participate in these research experiences, we require that a significant fraction of the students who are recruited to REU sites come from outside the host institution or organization. So that's something to consider if you're planning an REU site. So the research experiences for teachers program. So in engineering, and actually in partnership with computer science, we run a standalone research experiences for teachers site competition, and you can look that up on our website and find out more information with that solicitation. But across NSF, most directorates have some mechanism to support at least RET supplements, and these would be supplements either to REUs or sometimes other grants, depending on the directorate. So this would be something I would recommend you reach out to. Again, you can reach out to the cognizant program officer or representative program officer for the REU program, and they should be able to either answer your questions related to RET or direct you to someone who can. But the RET supplements really encourage experiences for K-12 teachers of science, technology, engineering, and math in coordination, typically, as I mentioned, with REU projects, although some directorates will accept RET supplements to projects outside of REU as well. And in engineering and computer science, we have this standalone program. For our standalone program in engineering and computer science, we also encourage involvement of community college faculty in addition to K-12 teachers. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about that. If you are in engineering or computer science and want to know more about that program, I can answer questions about that in the Q&A. And I think with this, I'm going to actually turn it over to my colleague, Jennifer Wade, who will give you more information about RUI.
Okay, thanks, Amelia. So now let's talk about the RUI and ROA program. So RUI is Research in Undergraduate Institutions. ROA are Research Opportunity Awards. And when I say PUI, that's Primarily Undergraduate Institution. So I'm going to use a lot of these acronyms, but that's basically what they are. So there's a separate solicitation for RUI and ROA proposals that would come from a PUI, right, from a Primarily Undergraduate Institution. And proposals are accepted at any time, although they're often reviewed in the programs. And so you want to make sure that you're conscious of whatever program deadlines might exist on top of that. So here's a link to the program website where you can find solicitations and the links to recent awards. So the goals of the RUI ROA program is to support PUI faculty, so faculty at primarily undergraduate institutions, in research that really engages them in their field, builds capacity for research at their home institution, and supports integrated research in undergraduate education. And that integration piece is really important. So ROAs, the Research Opportunity Awards, those also support PUI faculty research, but these typically allow those faculty to work as visiting scientists at a research-intensive organization. So they're collaborating with other NSF-supported investigators. Okay, so an RUI proposal might be just a brand new proposal, a request to support an individual research project or a collaborative project that involves PUI undergraduate faculty and students, at their own institution or with other institutions. It could also be a request involving shared research instrumentation. So you could submit an RUI proposal, say, to the MRI program, the mid-scale research instrumentation program. So as a group from your RUI, from your PUI institution. ROA opportunities are sort of additions onto existing awards, right? So somebody already has an award, and they're going to submit a request for a supplement, say, to an existing award to support ROA activities for undergraduate faculty, for PUI faculty. This could also be a request to rebudget funds in your existing award to support ROA activities for the PUI faculty. You can do this as a submission of a new proposal between a PUI and another institution that has a little ROA component built in as like a subaward. So basically, RUIs are standalone proposals, and ROAs are sort of additions onto proposals that have already been awarded. So you have to be an eligible institution to submit an RUI or ROA proposal. So eligible PUIs are accredited colleges and universities, all the way from a 2-year community college to a 4-year school that awards associate's, bachelor's, or master's degree in NSF-supported fields. But they have to have awarded 20 or fewer doctoral degrees in all NSF-supported fields during the combined last 2 academic years. So that's what makes an RUI, a PUI, significant. So the RUI proposals can involve more than one academic institution, but the PUI, the primarily undergraduate institution, needs to have the overall management responsibility for the project. And collaborations between PUIs and other organizations can be proposed, but we want most of the research to be done at the PUI. And that campus needs to be identified as the primary place of performance. So each PUI has to include a certification of RUI or ROA eligibility in the supplementary documents section of the proposal. So the proposal also needs to include an RUI impact statement that can be up to 5 pages. And this helps reviewers and program directors assess the impact of the proposed project on the research environment of the PUI, right? So how is this project going to impact the careers of the faculty who are involved and the students? And how is this project going to change the department's ability to prepare students for, either going on to graduate school or going on to careers in science and engineering? And this impact statement is really important. Reviewers and program directors really pay attention to what the potential impact of this award is going to be to this institution. Okay, and ROA eligibility, these requests are managed according to whatever the funding mechanism that you're submitting to is. For collaborative proposals that include a primarily undergraduate institution, that institution assumes the management responsibility for that part of the award. And the certification of eligibility needs to be included, like I just said, as a supplementary document in the PUI's portion of the proposal. So these proposals for RUI or ROA, need to have a the person who is submitting needs to have a commitment to be employed by that institution at the time the proposal is submitted. And while co-Is can be from other institutions or for other departments, but again, the primary person who is doing the proposing needs to be employed and certified that they are employed by that specific department. Okay, so that's all we have on that topic, and we are happy to take questions.
I guess we're ready to take questions, and we have answered a number of the questions in the Q&A. So hopefully you can see the answers to those questions, and we'll go through the questions that we have. And I think instead of just trying to go and bounce around here, I'm just going to work my way from top to bottom. I see that a number of these questions have been upvoted, and we'll try and get to as many of these as we can. So the first question, Jennifer, is, are there advantages or disadvantages to indicating every NSF submission as an RUI submission if we are an RUI institution? Is there a downside to doing so?
So I would say no, there is no downside to doing so. As a program director within my program, funding research at primarily undergraduate institutions is a priority for me. It's a part of my portfolio that I want to support. And so I cannot think, I wonder about what Amelia's thoughts are, but I cannot think of a downside to submitting if you're at an RUI. And also because it helps us understand the context of what you're proposing to do. And so we take some special consideration. We're not going to evaluate what you're proposing to do the same way we might evaluate an R1 proposal. And so to me, I think there's no downside at all. What do you think, Amelia?
Yeah, I would say the same thing is it's just another piece of information that we can help factor into our decision making and review process. So I wouldn't see a disadvantage either.
Okay, so this next question, I don't know that we'll have an answer for you, but I'll pose it to you in any case. But this is asking about for RET programs, and this person has said that their institution was targeted for paying teachers stipends as opposed to salary and fringe. And is NSF seeing other universities grapple with how to budget these funds as participant support?
That's a really interesting question. I haven't personally sort of seen this issue come up, but it may be happening and I'm just not aware of it. I know that for the standalone RET program that we manage in engineering with our partners in SISE, we do require that the teachers be paid a stipend. But I haven't heard any pushback from the community specifically about that. So.
Okay. This next question is, many faculty submitting career awards want to use the REU or RET mechanisms for their educational plan. How do you prefer they address this, as a supplemental request with the initial submission or afterwards? Or does that seem to vary by program and division and directorate?
Yeah, so I would say sort of it does vary by program and division. So career awards are managed across NSF, and there are a number of standards that are carried across NSF, but there's some variation depending on, on the managing program or managing office. And so I guess I would encourage you to reach out to the program director who's managing the program that's closest related to your career proposal and ask them specifically, because I know that I've heard sort of things on both sides of that in terms of the value of including REU or RET, or whether that should be fully integrated, since careers explicitly expect this integration of research and education. And so I would encourage you to reach out to your program director and ask them about that.
Okay. If you're requesting an REU component to a non-REU proposal being submitted, are you always required to include the supplementary document that describes the REU portion?
So for an REU component in a new proposal, it should include, there aren't really specific requirements about sort of how to do that, except that you should have enough information for NSF and the reviewers who review that proposal to have a good sense of whether you will have a strong mentoring component, whether whether the research will be appropriate for undergrads. So make sure that enough information is part of your description of the REU component for reviewers to judge that under the requirements of the REU program. So.
Okay, so the next question, it's a little long, so I'm just going to read it here. My university does not offer PhDs in any of the natural sciences. However, due to PhDs offered in education, psychology, and computer science, we're over the threshold to qualify as a PUI. A number of faculty in biology, chemistry, and physics and math are not too thrilled about this, as they are considered functionally at a PUI despite not technically being one. Is there anything that can be done about this, or any suggestions from NSF?
Yeah, I think that's a policy question. I'm not actually sure where it's set, whether it's set within NSF or it's set outside of NSF, who is considered a PUI and who isn't. But I will find out. That's a good question. Do you know, Jeremy? I don't actually know. I don't know the answer to that. I know there are definitions for minority serving institutions and Hispanic serving institutions and so forth that we get from the Department of Education, but I'm not quite sure about the PUI one. Right. It may be something that's set outside of NSF, but I appreciate you raising that question, whoever did. And I'm going to find out for ourselves, because it's a good one.
Are there tips for new junior faculty submitting from an RUI, common issues that should be avoided?
Sure. So my advice for submitting from an RUI is probably pretty similar to any early career faculty that I would give. I think, people writing their first proposal have a tendency to like really try to do everything all at once and try to tackle a huge problem, because you're like, I see a lot of proposals that try to tackle like their whole career in their first proposal, right? So my advice is to propose something tractable, be realistic about what your institution, which is an undergraduate institution, can handle, right? Like what do you have the bandwidth for? You probably have a high teaching load. What do you have time for? What can your students do, right? If you're involving them in research, are the projects that you're involving them in, are they appropriate for an undergraduate? Are they really more appropriate for a graduate student? So make sure that the work is appropriate for that size, or that, that level of student. And I also have seen some early career PIs at PUIs think that it's going to strengthen their proposal to partner with someone at a bigger institution just for that name or that university recognition. And I think that's false. So anyone that you're collaborating with should be a real collaboration, and that collaborator should be bringing something to the table. I'm not saying don't do it, but don't do it just because you think that that's going to help your proposal, float up because you have a bigger university that you're partnering with, right? Again, as I said earlier, we really want to support undergraduate institutions, and so there's value in that alone. Those are my brief pieces of advice.
Great. Could you talk a bit about REUs at non-academic institutions, their eligibility and likelihood of getting funded in comparison to those at academic institutions? And before you answer, I will just state that non-academic, because I saw a couple other questions about this, non-academic institutions are eligible to submit. And if you look at the solicitation, you'll see that all of the types of or categories of proposers that are identified in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide are eligible to submit to this program. Anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I think you answered it, Jeremy. We accept proposals from all different types of proposers. The one thing I guess I would say is because the REU program is really looking to support students in having authentic research experiences and allow them to participate in sort of novel, new, cutting edge research, as opposed to just an outreach activity, or we're really looking for that authentic research experience. I would say that as an institution, you should be able to provide students with that experience, but there isn't a specific requirement that you be, an academic institution. So. Okay,
and Amelia, could you talk a bit about how RUI proposals are reviewed? We might have lost Amelia.
I could talk about how proposals are reviewed from the GEO perspective, and then Amelia could maybe weigh in once her internet stabilizes. So I'll say RUI proposals are reviewed at the program level, so within the programs that they're most relevant. So they come into the solicitation, but then they're distributed to the programs. And so they're reviewed just like any other, at least this is in GEO, in the Earth Sciences division. We review them alongside the regular research proposals, although we do make sure that reviewers and panelists are aware that it's coming from an undergraduate institution. And so the expectations for what is included in terms of budget and student involvement is going to be different from a proposal that comes from Caltech or some other large institution. So they get some different consideration, but they're reviewed alongside the rest of the proposals.
Okay. We have a question asking, would NSF ever consider creating a publicly searchable database of REU student participants? I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here and say there may be some legal considerations with that, since NSF has doesn't have a relationship with the students, but we have a relationship with the institutions. And so I think that would be a question that NSF would leave to an institution to decide. The next question we have is, can a career proposal be indicated as an RUI submission?
You can submit a career from an primarily undergraduate institution, but career proposals are submitted to the career solicitation and not an RUI solicitation. So if it's a career proposal and you're submitting from a PUI, you should absolutely talk about that and talk that up, but it's not submitted to an RUI institution. So you won't have like the career RUI in the title, right? It's one or the other, but that doesn't preclude you as a PI at a PUI from submitting by any stretch.
Okay, and we'll go back to REUs. For the REU program for an REU program at an institution where opportunity is limited due to funding, but with large number of potential mentors, is there an expectation for a certain percentage of outside students?
Yeah, so for an REU site, there are actually requirements in the solicitation that are pretty explicit about the expectation in terms of recruiting outside students. So the solicitation states that a significant portion of the students be recruited from an institution outside of the host institution, and that over half of the students be recruited from institutions with limited access to STEM research opportunities. So as long as you follow the guidelines part in terms of student makeup.
Okay. I think we answered the question about non-academic eligibility. Can you elaborate on inclusion of international partners in an REU?
Sure. So we absolutely welcome international components or international research experiences. So there's actually a separate program managed by the Office of International Science and Engineering called IRIS, which is International Research Experiences for Students. So if your site is heavily international, or I would encourage you to take a look at that solicitation, which is a separate solicitation. But if you're interested in proposing, say, for example, an engineering REU site that has an international component, then it would still come in under the REU solicitation. And you would just need to include enough detail and enough information for NSF to evaluate and for the reviewers to evaluate whether the students will be well supported in both the domestic part and the international part. So if they're traveling, how will that be handled? How will the logistics be handled? How will students be supported, especially if they're coming from a diverse range of backgrounds and maybe haven't traveled before or haven't interacted with sort of large, with international research community. So making sure that you have enough information for NSF and reviewers to know that students will be put into certainly we encourage that as a part of an REU proposal, and we would review it under the same solicitation guidelines. So
yeah, I'll also mention that this session that's happening about an hour and 20 minutes from now will be from our Office of International Science and Engineering, and they'll be able to talk a little bit more about IRIS and REUs from the international perspective. So if you have more questions about that, you can certainly join that session. There's a question about do primarily undergraduate institutions get preference for REU awards?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that primary undergraduate institutions are any more advantaged or disadvantaged. Again, I would sort of return to one of the earlier answers where that authentic research experience is really one of the key components of the REU. So whether that's coming from a primarily undergraduate institution or an institution that has a lot of graduate research, that isn't such an important part of the REU site. It's much more important that the site addresses all of the other requirements under the REU. So,
And do you, and I guess this could go to both of you, suggestions to how for community colleges to become more competitive, as it's harder for them to compete with major research universities?
So this is a hard one to answer without knowing to which program you might be applying. My broad advice for community college PIs is to not try to propose something that can only be done at a 4-year or big research intensive school, but play up your strengths. Propose something that really builds on what the community college is good at and what your institution is good at in the community that you're in. That said, this is a time when it's important to talk to the program director of whatever program you're applying to, because there may be things that are not possible to be done at a community college. It's hard to answer without knowing to which program you're trying to apply.
Okay. For getting to ROAs, for an ROA collaborative proposal, does it allow for funding to go to the PUI for conducting research at the PUI, or is it only for work being done at the primary institution receiving the funding?
I'm pretty sure that the funds will go. The funds are for the PUI salary and work. They're partnering with another institution that's already funded, but I don't think that there are restrictions on where the work is actually done. It's mainly the intent of those ROA awards are to help someone at a primary undergraduate institution who doesn't have research support sort of get the experience that they would need. You can, in the solicitation, it probably details out exactly what you can ask for within the budget, but off the top of my head, I don't think there's a restriction on where that money goes. Like, the money gets awarded to the institution, but it is intended to support that person at the PUI.
Okay, a quick question. Do all NSF directorates accept RUI proposals? This is it is an NSF-wide activity, so.
They're listed at the top of the solicitation. It looks like it's everybody. I don't see anyone left out. But right, if you go to the solicitation 14-579, there's a list of all the directorates that are participating right there.
Yes, it looks to be all of them.
Looks like all of
them. Let's see. Is it possible that you could go over a little bit more about the partnership with the Department of Defense? Is this like having REU when you already have a Department of Defense award?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. This is a partnership that we've had between NSF and the Department of Defense for a number of years, although in recent years, the bulk of the funding actually has come specifically from the Air Force. And so what happens is NSF manages all of the REU site proposals. And once the REU site proposals come into NSF and NSF reviews them, then NSF will share the top proposals that may be potentially aligned with the research areas of interest for our partners, and they will let us know if they want to provide funding to help support and co-fund a number of the REU sites. But NSF manages that process. And so these are not supplements to DoD grants. These are full REU sites that are coming into NSF that happen to be aligned with some of the research priorities of the program officers in the Air Force, OSR. And so I don't know if that helps answer the question or clarify it, but they come into NSF just like a regular NSF REU proposal, and the alignment happens after the review process.
Okay. For REU and RET, do you consider non-STEM undergraduates who are interested in teaching?
So for REU, so I would say REU and RET are a little bit different. For REU, if there are undergraduates who are interested in a STEM field or participating in a STEM research area, then they would be eligible to participate. We don't actually have requirements about the subject area for the students. We leave that up to the sites, since the sites are the ones that actually recruit students. And for the RET, it's a little bit different. Again, I can sort of better speak to the engineering and computer science RET standalone program than to what other directorates are doing for RET supplements, since that varies quite a bit across NSF. But for the standalone program, we do require that the teachers be typically math or science teachers, though again, there is a variation amongst the different RET sites. The idea, though, is that a part of the RET program is not only for teachers to come into research labs and have authentic research experiences, but then they develop curriculum that they take back to their classroom. And so ideally, the teachers would be able to take their research experiences back to their classroom in some capacity, even if it's, sort of interpreting it or coming up with something that's connected, even if they're at the middle school or elementary school level. So the requirements for that are a little bit loose, but if you're a university and you're proposing to host a site, you would make a case for sort of how that implementation of curriculum would happen, given the teachers you're recruiting.
Okay, this is a more broader question, but it's what is the most appropriate opportunity to hire students research projects at their home institution? Or is there one?
So, yeah, I guess I can start, and then Jennifer, I don't know if you have anything about this, but the REU supplement could be a mechanism that you could use to bring students into labs at your home institution. There aren't requirements for recruiting outside for the supplement. That's a requirement for the REU site, but the supplements are typically bringing undergrads in to work on existing research projects that you have that are already funded by NSF. So that might be a mechanism that would allow you to bring students in and compensate them for participating in your research.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have a lot of people just write the undergraduates in from the beginning within their proposal, and some add them on later. And sometimes it depends on whether you have undergrads in mind when you're writing or you don't. There are really a lot of ways to do it. Yeah. So
a few questions I see about RUIs and how to begin and how to approach people at NSF. So if they have an idea for an RUI, what's your advice for finding the right person to speak with about those ideas? And then should they be targeting a specific solicitation or targeting a directorate, or is there an RUI office that makes that determination once you do submit a proposal as to where that proposal fits?
So again, the RUI proposals are basically, when they come in, you choose the program that best fits the work that you're doing. So for instance, I manage petrology and geochemistry within our sciences. So when someone's submitting to the RUI solicitation, there's a drop down where they choose petrology and geochemistry, and I get that proposal when it comes into my program. So the first place to start is what program does your research fit into? And we can talk about the ways that you can find that out. But if you know what kind of a program that you would like to submit to, I would reach out to that program director and say, hey, I'm at a PUI and I'm planning to submit a proposal. Is there anything that I should know, any priorities that your program is looking for from an undergraduate institution before I submit this proposal? And the ways that, if you don't know which program you fit into, there's a award search at nsf.gov. If you go to awards and search awards, you can look by keyword and sort of see what's been funded before. You can look through all of the directorate websites have what the current solicitations are with little program descriptions. You can just search the website by keyword and learn, what the programs are that fund the kind of research you do. But that's the thing. As soon as it comes in, it doesn't come to some central RUI office. It really comes to the program. You choose the program when you're submitting. So it'll go right to the program that will be reviewing the proposal.
Okay, a question about the RET program. Does the RET program offer only supplemental funding to existing awards, or does it provide funding for new projects?
So to my knowledge, the only standalone RET program is co-managed by engineering and computer science. And outside of engineering and computer science, I believe it's just supplements, and that's on a directorate and division level, and even a programmatic level, which programs welcome RET supplements. But if you are in engineering or computer science, we do have the standalone solicitation for that.
Okay, we have a question on the RUI. The question is, how heavily is preliminary data weighed in an RUI proposal?
This again is really going to vary depending on what program you're submitting to, because I get that question even for a regular research proposal. So my general advice is always, if you're trying to demonstrate that a technique works, if you're submitting a proposal and it's really heavily dependent on some technique or some model, then generally it's good to show that you have experience in that, or that you've tried it a little bit before and it does at least work. But there's no broad answer for how much preliminary data is required for every project, because it really varies by what you're trying to do. So talk to your program director, but also just, whenever you're writing a proposal, you include whatever strengthens your case that you have the skills to do what you're proposing to do, right? The merit review criteria, if you were at that session, which I think already happened, that, one of the review criteria is, are the PIs, capable of accomplishing what they propose to do? And if you need preliminary data to do that, then you should include it.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question. I know there are a few more questions in here. A lot of them, sometimes it's hard to understand the nature of the question, and so I would encourage you. I'll put my my contact information into the chat, and you can send me your question, and be happy to make sure that it gets answered. Let's see. Somebody's asking, let's see, for some reason, sometimes PIs want to support an undergrad participant or two, but are hesitant to frame it as an REU. Besides the additional 3-page REU description, is there any up or downside to listing undergrads as participant support costs? I'm assuming that's what they're saying, but not as an REU.
Jennifer kind of mentioned that you can write undergrads in a number of different ways, and I would say that I personally have not seen that there is an advantage or disadvantage to doing it as an REU supplement, or just writing them into the initial grant under participant support costs. So I think it's really up to you. If you are planning to involve undergrads from the beginning of your project, then it may be worth including them in the project from the start. If you decide later on, after you've been awarded, that you want to involve undergrads, then that may be an opportunity for you to apply for a supplement to get additional funding to support the undergrad. But yeah, to my knowledge, I would say there's no disadvantage to it, but it may have more to do with when you realize you want to involve an undergrad. So are you thinking about it already up front and they'll be integrated in the research project from the beginning, or is it something that you sort of decide you want to add on later?
Okay, well, I want to thank the both of you, Jennifer and Amelia, for sticking around and answering all these questions. I think it's been super helpful to everybody that's here. I want to thank all of you for attending, and hopefully you'll get a chance to attend some of the other sessions this week and then the week of November 30th. Thank you again for attending, and be well, everyone.